Unlike Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban has only 3 different game adaptations based on it. I fully understand the irony of saying only as if it is a small amount, but I suppose it is in comparison to 5 different games. Today we're taking a look at the GBA version of Prisoner of Azkaban developed by Kryptonite Games. The interesting thing about this title is that it's not a sequel to the previous action-adventure Game Boy Advance Harry Potter games, but rather it is a continuation of the Game Boy Color RPGs. As such, I would advise you to watch my reviews of Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets for GBC if you haven't, as to save time in this video I assume you know what I was talking about there. Links are in the description and YouTube cards. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into our review, which as always will be done with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system, starting with the first category, Design. This is the most important part of Stasocritic. A game is defined by its gameplay naturally, as well as structure and flow in the way it is built, so this category has the biggest weight, 4. Prisoner of Azkaban is best described as a couple steps forward from Chamber of Secrets and, sadly, even more steps backward. There are 2 big areas that have seen improvements. The first one is clarity of mechanics. The combat move order of your party members and opponents is shown in the top right corner, which helps with planning your next steps. If a spell is not unlocked yet or the character doesn't know it, you won't see it in the interface at all. Follow Brood Eye shows all spell effects as sliders, which helps to visualize faster how good a certain incantation is going to be against your enemies. Informous is a spell you will use mostly only once against an opponent type, so it is not in the list of standard spells. When you want to use wizard card combinations, instead of a checkmark for the whole combination, you can actually see if you're missing 1, 2 or 3 cards without making a selection. There is just a bunch of quality of life features that make the core gameplay process more engaging. Economy balance is also better than in Chamber of Secrets, so now it is not as problematic to actually buy equipment for your characters. The second big addition is the inclusion of spells on the overworld map. You can cast Flipendo to push objects, glaciers to make frozen bridges across rivers, unlock doors with Alhamora, and so on. This sounds cooler than it actually is, as outside of some late-game examples, most areas you explore just aren't that interesting, usually having only 1 clear path. In cases when there's 2, 1 would be blocked anyway because it is part of the scenario where you have to choose which 2 party members would complete the dungeon, and each has a different set of spells. Chamber of Secrets had pretty simple standard labyrinths, sure, but at least you went through the process of finding the correct path. Here in Prisoner of Azkaban, the correct path is usually but a single one, and spells are used mostly to unblock said path rather than to solve some interesting puzzles or do some exploration. It works for the purposes of increasing engagement because you have to press more buttons, but not much else. Again, there are exceptions, but not many. Then there are some aspects that were streamlined in comparison to the previous game, but they don't make it better. First, all objects you find in the world are put in chests. You can't interact with drawers, tables, boxes and other types of objects, not that there's many of them in the first place. And yeah, finding a card combination in a toilet was sort of weird, I suppose, but it made you appreciate all the details that the environments had while you explored every nook and cranny. Here in Prisoner of Azkaban you can just ignore everything outside of chests. Then offensive stats were removed, only defensive ones remained, which makes character customization less interesting, so the aspect of there being a better economy balance for you to be able to purchase equipment sort of becomes moot. But the most subtle and yet the most important friction point of Prisoner of Azkaban is the cost of spells in relation to your magic points pool. This is a turn-based RPG, and it can be pretty tricky to balance those, but the rule of thumb is that it's better to overpower players than underpower them. Underpowering can lead to more tactical choices, but if it's too much, the game can become more annoying than tactical. In Chamber of Secrets, you were a bit more on the overpowered side, and it was enjoyable. In Prisoner of Azkaban, you're a bit underpowered, and that's mostly due to spells being very expensive. For a quick comparison, in Chamber of Secrets, the different levels of Flipendo cost 0, 5 and 10 mana. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the different levels of Flipendo cost 0, 10 and 20 mana. But the amount of magic points your characters get per level is very similar between the two games, it wasn't adjusted. You can't upgrade your spell strength with equipment anymore, and due to lack of offensive stats, there is no damage bonuses related to that either, although each level up does influence the damage a bit. All in all, you need to use mana potions more often, but you don't get enough of them for the amount of times you would have to use them, so in the end you sort of try to live from level up to level up, as that's when your health and mana are both fully replenished. This balance, at times, actively discourages the usage of effective against certain enemy spells, and also makes it trickier to level those spells up, since you're always running out of magic points and have to resort to cheaper stuff. It doesn't help that some of the enemy weaknesses, resistances, and folio bruti are not correct. For example, there are enemies who are supposed to be weak to Petrificus Totalis, but you get a message that they're immune to paralysis when casting it on them, so now you've wasted precious mana. Then there are other aspects that are slightly worse than in Chamber of Secrets. There are less minigames and more dungeon-like areas, and you'd think having less fetch quests would make for a better game, but with the way those dungeon-like areas are set up, it actually messes up the pacing a bit. You're doing a lot of similar actions over and over again. Then there's practically zero reason to explore the castle, and it is severely underutilized. Not to mention, often it is very unclear where the actual doors leading to other places are located. And there is no map again, so prepare for some confused roaming, especially considering that some locations have switched places in comparison to the previous games. It is appreciated though that there is a much clearer shortcut system with a portrait room that connects all of the floors together. And look, it is quite clear why this sort of stuff happens. I don't have any confirmation for this particular case, but, to me, Prisoner of Azkaban clearly looks like a sequel on a new platform that was either mandated or desired to be much more ambitious than the previous games, but didn't have nearly enough time to get there, either from the get-go or due to higher-ups forcing to restart the project for one reason or another, so corners were cut. And this applies to the whole game, honestly. As such, should we open up all the scores for design, I will assign a 6. Prisoner of Azkaban adds very nice quality of life features and overall improvements to the Game Boy Chamber of Secrets experience, but also it is not as well designed, having issues with combat balance, pacing, level design. It is still good because the core is solid and it's not as broken in implementation as Philosopher's Stone, but regrettably, Prisoner of Azkaban is somewhat of a rough game. Let's move on to context. This category has a weight of 1 and it's about aspects that don't define the experience but do enhance it. Story, plot, character motivations, arcs, etc. Now, remember how I said that cutting corners applies to the whole game? That concerns the narrative as well. Chamber of Secrets for Game Boy Color had a really great story adaptation where absolutely every scene you would find in the source material you would find in the game as well, with added gameplay sections integrated well enough to expand on those scenes. The Prisoner of Azkaban clearly wanted to achieve the same thing, but didn't. The game represents only the most important plot points so the narrative would make sense, but a lot of things that actually add character and details to everything that is going on, not to mention lore and themes, are missing. The writing is very bland, again it exists just to make sure the plot is represented. And the attempts at humor are not nearly as successful as those from Chamber of Secrets and even Philosopher's Stone. Prisoner of Azkaban lacks charm. Even the conversations with students between different goals feel bland, not that there is a lot of students walking around Hogwarts anyway. You do get to fight Draco Malfoy as a final boss, weirdly enough, being the last obstacle preventing you from helping Sirius Black to escape. Anyway, you know that I don't like talking about a category more than I find worth talking about, which is why I am going to assign a 5 to context now. Prisoner of Azkaban represents the plot of the game well enough, but without any central mysteries or character development or anything of the sorts. Not even Marauder's map is present. I personally find the story of Prisoner of Azkaban the movie to be much better than the story of Chamber of Secrets the movie, but in the case of these Game Boy games, it's quite the opposite. Prisoner of Azkaban is just not that exciting. let's discuss aesthetics. This is another category with a weight of 1, as it's again about things that enhance the experience rather than define it, this time through visual style, music, sounds, etc. Once again, the game's ambition, combined with a clear lack of development time, has led to this aspect not feeling as well defined as in the previous game. You know that I wasn't a fan of the Chamber of Secrets visual style, but it's difficult to deny just how well done and implemented it was. Now, I'm not a fan of the Prisoner of Azkaban visual style either, but also in terms of implementation, it's very weird as well. Character animations are very stiff. Environment backgrounds feel like they're for a different game. They're also somewhat blurry, and while it helps the characters to pop, it also prevents you from understanding if some part of the wall on the side is actually a wall, or a door, or something else, as an example. Battle screens try to implement 3D environments, but even on a small GBA screen they look barren. Then there's also the aspect of our main trio being stylistically different between their appearances on the overworld map, battle screen, character portraits and menus. In the latter, it's 2D renders of models from the console version, and that feels especially out of place. Prisoner of Azkaban is just a very weird game to look at. But in terms of music, it's actually pretty good, especially from the technical aspect. Game Boy Advance is a handheld that was never known for its sound capabilities. A lot of times music is of a pretty low quality, but Prisoner of Azkaban seems to have done literal wizardry with its sounds. Listen to the game's main theme. But the music quality is not enough for me to assign anything else other than a 6 to Prisoner of Azkaban. It's a very stylistically inconsistent game and just feels weird. Time to talk about Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2. It focuses on how well the game connects its different aspects together to create a wholesome, holistic experience. At one point during the game, you get to Transfiguration class. Professor McGonagall expects applause for her transfiguration from a cat into a human. You're then sent into a maze to find her. For some reason, Crabbe and Goyle are in there, so you have to fight them. When you finish the maze and find McGonagall in the form of the cat, she ends the class and gives you the Petrificus Totalis spellbook, which is not related to Transfiguration even. Stuff just happens. Previous games followed a logic of not putting random enemies into locations where there is no other people. It was an attempt to reconcile the game's needs with the world's needs. You could call it clunky, but it worked. While the Prisoner of Azkaban has locations like Hogwarts Train, where the rule is just not followed and students roam around rats and spiders. This sort of stuff happens very often, where the Harry Potter universe is quite unsuccessfully used as a skin to gameplay elements. This is why, should you open up all the scores for Cohesion, I will assign a 5. A saving grace from a 4 are some leftover elements from Chamber of Secrets, like the character abilities intersecting with their personalities. Now let's get to the final category, emotions. This is the most subjective part of Stasocritic. It is all about personal feelings, but it has the second biggest weight, 3, because of those personal feelings matter a lot. If you watch my other Prisoner of Azkaban videos, you know that it's my favorite Harry Potter movie. And I just really want Prisoner of Azkaban to also have my favorite Harry Potter movie game adaptation related to it. But as it is now, at the moment of writing this, that place is taken by the Game Boy Color Chamber of Secrets. Prisoner of Azkaban has just been disappointing. I actually dropped it after going through half of the game and watched the rest on YouTube to see what it's like. And look, the game is playing fine, it's not like you can't enjoy it. Yeah, constantly running out of magic points is annoying, but I went through much worse frustrations in GBC Philosopher's Stone and I still finished that one. But Philosopher's Stone, for all its flaws, had charm that made me want to like it despite its problems. Prisoner of Azkaban lacks this charm, so even though it has less issues, I also felt less compelled to keep going. I sort of got tired with the pacing, the dungeons, the few minigames that exist are sort of boring, the dialogues are not enjoyable. The combat loop is still fun overall, but that wasn't enough for me. This is why ultimately I'm going to assign a 6 for emotions. I wanted to like the game as much as I liked the previous Harry Potter RPGs. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I didn't have any sort of good time at all, but the game was just lacking character that made me enjoy Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets. Let's summarize everything. After all scores and their weights are taken into account, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban for Game Boy Advance gets a final Stasocritic rating of 53. It's alright. If you're a big fan of Harry Potter RPGs, you're very likely to enjoy this one. Sadly, it's definitely not as good as Chamber of Secrets for Game Boy Color. And while as a game, Prisoner of Azkaban is better than the Philosopher's Stone RPG and has a higher final rating, I would say that for all its flaws, Philosopher's Stone still wins as an experience. And it's sad because you can definitely see the huge plans developers had for this title. They made a really good Chamber of Secrets game and wanted to make an even better Prisoner of Azkaban one, but it didn't pan out. A pity. Still, if you like Harry Potter and are interested in RPGs, I don't see a reason to not at least try the game out. Otherwise, I would advise to play the Game Boy Color Chamber of Secrets and take a pass on this one.